Welcome to this afternoon session. To those of you in the audience, thank you for your patience. We were just waiting for a few more people to join us. How wonderful it is to be here in Dubai at a live trade fair with people and not on a Zoom call. Very, very exciting, and congratulations to Arabian Travel Market and the Dubai authorities for having been able to pull off this session. My name is Daniela Wagner. I'm the Director for Europe and the Middle East for PATA, the Pacific Asia Travel Association, and we're going to be putting on what we hope is a very thought-provoking session this afternoon about East meets West, looking at the different ways in which different parts of the world have reacted to the last year of the pandemic, and how we might be similar or different in the ways that we move forward into a post-pandemic era, looking at some of the opportunities and challenges that we've all faced worldwide, but specifically focusing on this link between East and West. As you will see from the stage, unfortunately, most of our speakers have not been able to be here in person today, but they're joining us on screen, which we're very grateful for. And to keep me company on stage is Paula Lacey, who is the Director of Connecting Travel, which has just opened up its office in the Middle East and is part of Jacobs Media Group. In London, Travel Weekly, which is the leading publication for the travel trade, has been a long-term media partner for PATA. So we really appreciate that and look forward to working with you, Paula, here in the Middle East. Paula, over to you. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Daniela, and good afternoon. So I would just like to very briefly tell you about Connecting Travel, which has recently launched here in the region. It's an online dual-language media platform serving the travel and hospitality sector in the Middle East. Three main pillars of the business: news, thought leadership, and events. As Daniela said, it's also sister publication to Travel Weekly in the UK and other brands such as Aspire, Travolution, and The Caterer. So it's very much about supporting the region and businesses in the region to meet its tourism goals. That's for both inbound and outbound travel. So we're very excited that it's now officially launched. So, okay, let's get on with today's session and meeting our panel. Firstly, we have Kashif Khalid, Regional Director of Ayata, who I can tell you has had some challenges travelling of late, and we almost got him here today, but like many, has had to abandon his plans. But we're still delighted you could join us virtually, so welcome, Kashif. Daniela, would you like to introduce our other panellists who are joining us today?
Yes, it's my pleasure. So first of all, I'd like to introduce the CEO of PATA, Dr. Mario Hardy, who you can see on the screen with the PATA background. He's based in Bangkok. Over to London, where we have Mr. Nigel David, who is the Director for Middle East and APAC for WTTC, the World Travel and Tourism Council. And then over to Spain, where we have Carlos Sendra, who is the Chief Marketing Officer for Mabrian Technologies, which is a favored data analytics provider for governments and the travel trade. Welcome, gentlemen.
So, in this session of the East meets the West, it's all about lessons learned as we head towards recovery and, of course, ongoing resilience. So we're going to start with a view from the East, followed by a view from the West. So, Dr. Hardy, first of all, could you give us a little background on PATA and its reach? And then if you could kick off the discussion for us by sharing what the key activities and learnings taken by organisations and governments in the East to tackle the effect of the pandemic, and also the support you were able to provide as an organisation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paula. Great pleasure to be with you. You know, for those of you who are not familiar, PATA stands for Pacific Asia Travel Associations. We're an organization which is celebrating its 70th anniversary this year. PATA was born in 1951 in Hawaii and was relocated to Thailand in 1998. The organization's mission is the sustainable and responsible development of travel and tourism to, from, and within the Asia Pacific. That is our mission. That is actually what we stand for and what we believe in. We're also unique in a sense where we have our members are both public and private. We have governments around the world represented in our organization, as well as large corporations and also SMEs, small, medium-sized enterprise, from every spectrum of the travel and tourism industry, from the smallest tour operators to the largest businesses and OTAs and technology companies, airlines, airports, and etc. We really try to bring together both public and private in all of our discussions to look at current situations, either in times of crisis, as well as in times of good times, looking at opportunities to even expand travel and tourism further. Now, over the last 15 months, obviously, it's been an immense challenge for this industry. You don't need to be told that. I'm sure you're fully aware of it, that we've all been severely impacted as an industry. Back in April last year, the organization PATA ran a survey. So this is a long time ago, over a year ago already, just to try to understand how the industries was impacted already at that time. Now, again, this is April last year. Out of 500 responded of small, medium-sized enterprise, which were the most severely impacted, already 15% had closed their business permanently with no intentions of coming back to the sector. 42% of the responded said they only had money for 2 to 3 months before they had to also close their business, which means by now, the vast majority are closed. 35% of those also responded by saying they already had made significant layoff, either temporarily or permanently within their organization. And lastly, the most significant response there, or number, that actually really surprised not only us, but many people, is that 65% of these businesses had no crisis management plans in place. They were not prepared for any type of crisis, let alone something of this magnitude. I don't think any of us thought 15 months ago that this crisis would last so long and be so impactful as it has been in our sector. Over the last few months, more specifically since the beginning of this year, we've seen how over the last 15 months, trends have changed and how people responded to the crisis in a very different manner. If you go back in the early stage of the crisis, you could probably argue that actually Asia was leading in a way of how we manage the health situation, probably actually better than the other parts of the world. But lately, things have shifted. In the West, it appears that actually the health crisis has actually taken the lead in terms of management with the accelerations of vaccinations in many countries. And you could argue that actually it's really part of our debate today is maybe the West actually prioritized initially the economy over health, and possibly the East focused mostly on the health of their citizens and residents, and not so much on the economic impact. From where I sit, which is in Thailand, as you can see from my background, the situation is quite dramatic at the moment. We had, until Christmas, things went really well. We were a good handle of the crisis in terms of the health part, not so much on the economic part. And we had some great plans of reopening the market that are still in place. However, over the last few weeks, the number of cases have increased significantly here, specifically in Thailand. And I'm sure all of you are fully aware of also the situation currently in Singapore, with a number of clusters and increases, the country being on lockdown, airports being shut down completely. City of Bangkok is in partial lockdown also, has been for several weeks and will continue to be for a number of weeks. Chinese Taipei was also announced a lockdown again, and some new clusters and cases, and of course the situation in India and several other countries in the region here in Asia. For most countries around Asia, the borders are closed. So when I hear my friends Nigel and others around the world saying they've actually been traveling to Mexico and other places over the last few weeks, part of me look at them with envy that I've actually been able to travel. When I hear that Europe is reopening its border to European citizens and residents to be traveling across respective countries, I look at them with envy. because I dream to travel, as many of us do, and many other people in the world hope so. Because we're not in that situation yet. We can't travel overseas, or if we do, we face some severe challenges in returning home. And so there's all aspect of the vaccinations and the protocols, and I look forward to hear from Kashif later about how the importance of getting the protocols and countries and destinations to work together to ensure that we have a seamless way of traveling moving forward to make it as easy as possible. Many of you will be familiar with bubbles. We've been talking about bubbles for several months already, almost a year. Australia and New Zealand have a bubble in place that appears to be really effective at the moment, and I wish them the best moving forward, and it continues to be as stable as it has been over the last few weeks. However, many of you would have heard the on and off potential bubble between Singapore and Hong Kong, which still actually, as of today, have been postponed once again. And now we understand the reasons for that, but it also contributes to challenges in building confidence in the traveling public in the future. For those who have booked tickets on these bubbles, which I understand were sold out in the space of a few hours when they're initially announced, now are actually stuck with tickets and haven't been able to use yet. So they may think twice the next time about planning their trips, knowing that this bubble may actually not happen, or in the worst case, you've traveled and you're stuck at your destination, not being able to return home. Quarantines, which are imposed in many destinations, such as in Thailand and other places, have also been a deterrent for people to travel overseas. It adds to your cost, to your expenses. The cost of testing, which is also quite significant in some places, and if you're a family of 4 people traveling, that's even more. So there is still a lot of challenges for us to face as an industry moving forward in regaining the confidence of the traveling public to get people to travel again, to make it as easy as possible, as simple as possible, while still protecting the health and safety of the respective residents and citizens and their countries. We feel there's still a long way to go before we can regain not only confidence, but the ability to travel as freely as we were before. In our annual forecast at PATA, or I would say not really forecast anymore, but more like scenario planning, looking at what are the best and worst cases, maybe the average cases for 2021, 2022, and 2023, which we've just revised recently and announced today, are still looking at 2021 from Asia's point of view at a very severe impact, with very few travel, of as an average across the region of only maybe about 4 to 5% compared to pre-COVID-19. In 2022, we anticipate that this will improve and will get better as vaccination accelerate in their respective destinations, and 2023 will again improve. But we still do not expect that we'll be able to achieve the same level of growth we had pre-COVID-19 until possibly 2024, if not longer. My hope is that it's actually shorter, but currently based on the current trends, it doesn't look as promising as it was maybe a few months ago. Now, I will conclude by saying one thing that you must keep in mind. When we talk about numbers and we talk about averages, it is an average for the entire region. This situation is extremely unusual because the recovery is uneven. Certain countries within Asia and other parts of the world will do far, far better than what we forecasted. And others will equally do worse than what we planned. And that is the challenge of this current situation that we're facing, is the fact that it's unpredictable and it changes on a very frequent basis. Yesterday, we could have told you actually we look very optimistic in certain areas. But today we may have a completely different view, and it will change again tomorrow, and next week, and the week after. And that's what makes this current situation so challenging for the industry. How do you plan for the month and years to come on your staffing, on your investment, the asset that you invested into, in retaining those, if you can't really plan for the short, even in a medium term, even a short term at the moment, that's the challenge that we're all facing at the moment. Now, I know I'm not really painting a really positive view for many of you who are listening today, but I think it's important to be realistic in this current situation to ensure that we're prepared. Hopefully we're wrong in certain areas and we'll actually improve moving forward. But I think it's important we stay realistic and actually plan for the month and the years to come. But we will only be able to achieve this if we all stand and work together. So I'm really pleased that, throughout the international organizations around the world, WTTC, PATA, Ayata, and ACI, and many other organizations have come together on a weekly or bi-weekly basis since the beginning of the crisis to share our knowledge, to share best practices, to work and lobby together to ensure that we have a safe recovery and a speedy recovery as much as possible. So I will stop here for the moment, Paula. I'm sure there will be questions later on, but I will end up the microphone back to you.
Thank you very much, Mario. I should also add that Mario has quoted quite a lot of facts and figures. We've got lots of really interesting and useful information on the website, which is constantly updated at pata.org. So please feel free to have a look at that or come and give me your card at the end. So very interesting perspective that you've shared from the East. I think some of it also resonates very much with what people in the Middle East and in Europe are feeling, especially about the sort of stop-start approach and lack of clarity and uncertainty, which I think is extremely damaging for the industry. But before we open up for the general discussion, Nigel, you have a slightly different view, I believe, from the part of the world that you're looking at. So could you share your thoughts with us, please?
Many thanks, Daniela. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really sorry I couldn't be with you today, but I'm based in the UK, and the UK government currently has the UAE on the red list, which would mean I would have to quarantine in a hotel on my return. So we're working really hard to change that, and we're very hopeful that that will change soon. Maybe to just start with a few words of introduction. So I've been with WTDC now for 10 years. I look after the Asia, Pacific, and Middle East and African regions. WTDC is over 30 years old. We're the organization which looks after the global private travel and tourism sector. Our members are the CEOs and chairs of both large and small travel businesses around the world. We have many members in the Middle East. Paul Griffiths, the CEO of Dubai Airports, is our vice chair. And every year, WTDC produces the economic research for 185 countries, 25 regions of the world. And this data shows GDP, jobs, employment, investment, exports, that sort of data. So we produced the information in 2019, which was the last full year before the pandemic hit. And then we also have recently published the data for 2020. And it shows, really building on what Mario just spoke about, the devastating impact that the pandemic has had on our sector. The GDP from travel and tourism has almost halved in the 12 months. So we lost $4.5 trillion of GDP in 2020 compared to 2019. What really shows, I think, the sheer scale of the impact is that in 2019, travel and tourism was 10.4% of the total global economy. But last year, that was reduced to just over 5%, 5.5%. So you can see almost halving of the significance of travel and tourism, and that shows really the devastating impact that the pandemic has had. If you look at the data, you can see differences between the East and West, and I think that builds on a little bit what Mario was saying. So at a total level, the world saw 60 million jobs lost in 2020 for travel and tourism. That's travel and tourism jobs compared to 2019. But more than half of those lost jobs were in Asia Pacific. And in fact, in Asia Pacific region, there was an 18% decline in jobs employed. If you look at an area like Europe, for example, that reduction was much fewer. So we saw 9% of jobs were lost. And I think that's to some extent a reflection of the government worker protection programs that are in place, perhaps a little bit more prevalent in the West than in the East. And some of those jobs have been protected. And hopefully, as things start to recover, those jobs can come off the worker protection programs, and businesses will have a chance to move quite quickly to respond to increases in demand. So I think that probably is it. I would agree with Mario with his observation that maybe the East were much more focused in the early stages on the sort of health aspects, public health. I think in the West you saw a lot of governments, and particularly I think here in the UK, quite slow to respond. And I think they were trying to balance the economic impact with the health. And then you saw significant rising of COVID cases and hospitals starting to be overwhelmed, etc. So I think we've then moved quite quickly to sort of focus on health, and now we're starting to see, I think, the West starting to move back, pivot back, if you like, to look now at more of the opening up the economy again, and starting to look at international travel. So I think you're starting to see some changes here, some early green shoots here in the West.
Thank you, Nigel. Just a quick question on that. I'm assuming that some of this data is available on wttc.org, yeah? So again,
yes, you could.
Sorry, go ahead.
You can access the data, and I'm very happy to share it with anybody if they wish to contact me after. But we publish it on 185 countries and 25 regions, and we have a back catalogue of this data. It is also interesting because we also look at changes in source markets and destination markets. We look at the change in mix between business and leisure travel, between international and domestic. And as you'd anticipate, there have been some significant changes. So if you look at the mix of international versus domestic, that has changed dramatically in the last 12, 18 months or so.
Yeah. Thank you. Before we move on to the other panelists, Mario, do you have any immediate reactions to what Nigel has said?
No, not at the moment. I'll wait for later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Paula.
Thank you. Okay, so some really interesting geographical differences there. I'd now like to bring in Kashif, firstly to tell you about his role at Ayata, and then to give us an overview of Middle East airlines and the challenges faced by COVID-19, and also the business models that airlines have adapted during the pandemic and also for post-pandemic. And then finally, the forecast for recovery and the revenue streams, because they've certainly got a big job ahead of them. Kashif.
Thank you so much. So as both of my fellow panelists had mentioned earlier, the aviation industry goes hand in hand with tourism. In fact, in the Middle East and North Africa region, the aviation sector contributes nearly $213 billion to the Middle East and North Africa GDP and supports about 3.4 million jobs in tourism, hospitality, and aviation, out of which aviation exclusively is about 600,000 jobs. With the onslaught of the pandemic, what we've seen is global traffic and connectivity has been cut. In the Middle East region, we're no different than many of our other markets, whether it's Asia Pacific, Europe, or North America, in terms of the challenges that the airlines or the aviation industry has had to adapt with respect to the challenges of COVID-19. Ayata very quickly had to work in tandem with organizations such as ICAO, ACI, but also regional associations such as PATA, ACO, and AFPRA to look at developing a single voice for the aviation industry. Many of the challenges that the aviation industry had early on was with the erosion of traffic. How do airlines manage flights? Look at getting essential PPE as well as cargo across borders. A lot of the cargo connectivity relied on the belly space and passenger flights, which was taken out of the system. And in the Middle East region, just to give you a perspective, air connectivity nosedived from about 1,060 city pairs in April 2019 to approximately 440 city pairs in April 2020, having a profound impact on not only connectivity, but also the loss of passenger traffic and cargo capacity. So many of the Middle Eastern airlines, like their peers around the world, focused on cargo, which became the poster child for aviation, transporting essential goods such as personal protective equipment, ventilators, face masks, and now vaccines around the world. So while there was a loss of passenger traffic, airlines had to compensate by focusing on cargo and looking at additional ways of generating revenue. Many of the airlines, especially in the Middle East region, have also been challenged by the importance of connecting traffic. In the Middle East, with the exception of Saudi Arabia, most of our airlines do not have a large domestic market, in fact, no domestic market, with the exception of Saudi. And since long-haul markets have been the slowest to reopen, that is also having an impact on their growth. One of the other challenges that the Middle East airlines have, in relation to that connectivity, is that they're reliant on large source markets for both VFR traffic, but also transfer traffic. And with what's taking place right now in the Indian subcontinent, many of the airlines such as Emirates, Etihad, Qatar Airways, and those based in the region are having a challenging time with respect to flying to and from the Indian subcontinent, but also the demand that the Indian subcontinent generates for their network, especially to North America, Canada, the UK. But it's interesting, Nigel mentioned the UK. Unfortunately, we still have the UK as part of the red list for the UAE, which is, again, one of the largest source markets and destination markets for the Middle East region. So from an industry perspective, what Ayata has been focusing on is getting governments and non-traditional aviation stakeholders, such as the health authorities, to be on the same page, look at a pragmatic approach to quarantine, using testing as a way of opening up borders, but also looking at ways to facilitate passengers, because there's quite a lot of information which can be daunting for the traveling public. Quarantine, testing, and border measures were some of the challenges that passengers have, but also things such as contact tracing data, as well as additional forms and paperwork that need to be completed, also are adding to that mix. And now what we're noticing is that many governments and authorities are looking at vaccine border diplomacy as well. So the industry position is, from an Ayata perspective, focused on the WHO guidance. Don't look at vaccinations as a precursor to opening up borders. Using safe and cost-effective testing is still the way to go. We do believe that countries can reopen borders and safely facilitate passengers across continents by using testing as an effective means. Thank you.
Okay. Mario, Nigel, what about your views on airlift? So we've touched on some of the challenges. So what's happening in your regions and challenges and green shoots? So if we start with Mario, please.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Airlift is definitely going to be a huge challenge moving forward. When I mentioned the regaining the confidence of the travelers moving forward, there are various factors. One of them is obviously health and safety is critical. The ease of travel, obviously, in terms of protocols at departures and arrivals and at destinations itself will be important. But the other critical factor is air access, the availability of frequency of flights, the either direct or connectivity, good connectivity to get to your destinations. And if you were to make a search today to travel from Asia to maybe South America or other parts of the world, it would be extremely challenging, in some cases, nearly impossible. We at PATA also represent the Pacific, and the Pacific Islands are potentially severely impacted. Some destinations in the Pacific already had only one flight a week. Now they have none, zero, except maybe for cargo lift. And so it will be a challenge for many of those destinations to regain that access that they had before. We also know as very well that the airlines have been severely impacted financially, and therefore may not be able to restart the routes at the same frequency that they had before, and as rapidly as the demand rises. So it's a challenging, and I said to someone recently, I used to work for an airline for a number of years. I would hate to be someone working in revenue management for an airline today and trying to figure out what my route network will be over the next few months and even years to come.
Nigel?
Yes, I would agree with some of those comments. I used to work in revenue management at TUI. I think one of the things you need is sort of predictability. And some of the airlines are really struggling because decisions are made really late by governments around opening up corridors or relaxing restrictions, etc., around quarantines. And it's really hard for airlines to plan on that basis. You need a longer lead time in order to put everything into effect and move the capacity around. Just as importantly, you then need consistency. You need for those decisions not to change. And we saw that and the impact of that last year in the summer in the UK when suddenly decisions were changed and countries were within days put onto a red list, and you then see travelers scrambling to try and get home before they have to go into quarantine. So that has to change. There is no way that the sector can plan on that basis. What I would say is I think there are a lot of examples of green shoots that are starting to emerge now, and I think we saw recently earlier this week or late last week, Saudi and Abu Dhabi announcing that they will be removing restrictions for quarantines from I think it's from the 20th of May and the 1st of July respectively, and I think that's a very positive development. I agree 100% with Khalid that we can move to a different model whereby we use negative tests and vaccine as a means for people to travel. And you've seen some great example of countries, particularly in Europe, starting to take a lead on this. You've seen Greece and Portugal as two recent examples. So for Greece, you can go to Greece if you have or you will be able to go to Greece if you have a negative test or you have you've had the vaccine. And they will just do random tests. So they're not requiring people who've had a vaccine, for example, to have a test as well. And I think these are important steps, and they're the way forward if we're really truly to reopen travel, international travel going forward. So lots of green shoots starting to emerge.
Thank you, Nigel. Actually, we've seen this even in the course of this week here in Dubai with the announcement of the opening up of the Saudi borders. And actually yesterday there was also easing of restrictions here in Dubai itself about social distancing and capacity in public venues. Just like to say, if anybody in the audience has a question, we do have a roving microphone. Just put up your hand. It's quite dark out there, but please, you have an extraordinary panel of intelligent people who have a lot of experience. Please feel free to ask questions. But now, moving away from the practicalities of travel and the kind of nuts and bolts of it, be really interested to hear from you, Carlos, what the data is telling you and what you must have seen enormous shifts in the work that you've done and completely changed your approach to that work over the course of the last year. Carlos.
Yeah, totally. Thank you, Daniela. And first of all, thank you for the invitation of being here in such a great panel with important speakers and organizations. It's an honor for us. Just to briefly present what Marian is. Marian is a technological company specialized in travel intelligence services. And what does this mean? That means that we transform data, huge amounts of data for the travel and tourism sector, into information. Right, that's our work. We are right in the middle, transforming one thing in another, just to facilitate organizations making better decisions, understanding the current trends, and trying to anticipate the next trends. And the key point I would mention is it's information. We realized during the last years, we've been working for the last 6 years in travel intelligence. Specifically, that organizations, even companies, the most of them are not ready to manage big data, right? So what we realize is that we have to provide answers. Right now, what the sector needs are answers, not more questions. So basically what we do is try to transform all that information based in data analytics into specific answers, right? And it's been, as you said, Daniela, an enormous shift in the sector. But instead of looking for differences between West and East, I would go first of all to one thing which is common in both sides, let's say, which is a detail that can be unnoticed, but I think it's pretty important from our perspective. And that's that the organizations, the ministries of tourism, the governments, has started to make decisions based on data.
In terms of the opportunities, what do each of you three gentlemen see? I mean, we've talked a little bit about testing and about vaccinations and about, you know, alignment of protocols between countries. But what is sort of going forward and thinking slightly outside of the box, what for you would be the biggest opportunity in a kind of post-COVID era? It's been extraordinarily challenging, and we've all talked about the problems a lot, but you know, Nigel's been talking about green shoots, and there's been lots of talk about the importance of sustainability and about building back better. I mean, what would each of you in a nutshell say is the biggest opportunity that you see either for your region or for your organization? Nigel, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first on this. So I think there's been a lot of good has come out of bad with the pandemic. And for me, I think there's a massive opportunity with technological change. I think we've seen that with the development and deployment of vaccines. I mean, that's like a unique experience in our lives. Never been done before. Has a vaccine been developed so quickly? And then the rollout has just been very impressive certainly in certain countries around the world. And I think we can build on this. I think, you know, we already talked earlier about tests that are being developed, non-invasive saliva tests that can give an instant result. I think these sort of ways of being able to spot if someone is carrying some sort of virus, I think we'll see the technology accelerate, and I think that will be good for the future of travel, because I think you'll have a much more resilient form of travel going forward. So in much the same way that we saw changes after 9/11 and the terrorist attacks and how security has become much more of a focus for people traveling, I think we'll see now a greater focus on health and welfare with people traveling. And as I say, I think some of the technological advancements will come to play there. So yes, I think technology can make a big difference. I think the whole way in which we travel, using much more of a digital way of traveling, using facial recognition, etc., the move to have digital vaccines, digital tests, I think all of that, you know, a touchless experience will again transform the way in which people are traveling in the future. So I see a lot of good coming out of this, but I would say that's some of the most exciting areas for me.
Great. Kashif, anything you'd like to add from your perspective? Biggest opportunity?
Yeah, no, thank you. I think I agree with Nigel. There's so much built up demand that people have to travel. Many people around the world have been confined to their countries and in many cases their homes for over 15 months. What we saw just a couple of days earlier with the announcement of Saudi Arabia opening up, we saw over 400 flights take off in the first day that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia opened up from across 8 different airports. I certainly agree with Nigel that technology has an important role to play. We have to bring in non-traditional aviation and hospitality partners such as the health segment into the ecosystem like we did security after 9/11, whether it's testing or vaccinations. Both of those means are going to be embedded within the travel ecosystem. It's just that how we use technology with an emphasis on contactless solutions, biometrics, but also looking at organizing and making that process as easy for not only the passengers, but the people and staff that work in the aviation ecosystem. Just by way of example, an airline check-in agent previously had to just verify a passenger's passport, visa, and then check them in. Now they need to check their travel history, whether they've been into countries that are on banned lists, whether they have the appropriate contact tracing forms, whether they have the PCR, do they meet the vaccine exemptions. So the average time it takes to process a passenger has grown exponentially. And by using digital solutions, we can help mitigate some of those challenges that not only the workers within the aviation ecosystem have, but also the impact it's having on infrastructure. Let's keep in mind, with the onslaught of COVID, many facilities such as airports and other areas have had to rationalize their infrastructure. So they're essentially processing less people with the same space due to physical distancing, temperature checks, and additional processes that they've put in place. But definitely technology can help alleviate that, and hopefully governments capitalize on the demand that is built up over these months. And I think in the region, many governments are doing a great job. Certainly Dubai has been relatively open for tourists from around the world, but also countries like Egypt and Ethiopia have done a great job as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we go back to you, Carlos, I'm just going to ask Mario the same question, then I'll come back to you now that you're back with us. Thank you. Mario.
Daniela, thank you very much. I think you probably know what the first part of my answer will be, is obviously regarding technology. Most people know that I'm passionate about it. But what I find interesting during this crisis is the accelerations of the development of technologies that we were already, hoping would actually move forward before the pandemic, which were moving at a very slow pace, have now either been implemented or are being implemented moving forward. So things have accelerated much, much faster. Nigel talked about biometric passports or traveling across, touchless check-in for hotels, for flights, and etc. Digital payment, which is increasing at a phenomenal rate here in Asia and across the world, and so much more that we're looking at the moment.
Yeah. Great. Okay, Carlos, the question I was asking the gentleman while you were frozen was about what they see as the biggest opportunity in a post-pandemic world. But why don't you wrap up what you were going to say on the data side and then answer that question at the end?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. It was a blackout, a short blackout in the office. Yeah, well, it's actually related. I think both the answer for both questions, it's what I was about to say, and is the change on the mindset in the sector, in the governments, but also in the companies, probably more in the public sector, in terms of using and needing data analytics in order to make decisions. Nowadays, there is obvious that anyone is paying attention into infection rates, vaccination rollout rates, etc., before making any type of decision in the tourism sector, right? So this is it can be a small detail, not that can be unnoticed, but it's pretty important, this change of mindset that we should maintain that mindset in terms of using all that information to bring the sector into the next level in terms of efficiency, let's say. So I think this is what is more disruptive from my point of view. Probably we needed, and this is hard to say, something like this to speed up the incorporation of all these new features and technology to the sector, since till now the travel and tourism sector was going really well, was growing constantly, and that's kind of difficult, making disruptive changes in a sector which is going well, right? If something it's going well, you don't touch anything. Right now we have the opportunity to starting from deep down, introducing all these new facilities, new features.
Okay, did you want to share the slides that you had, Carlos, or are we going to leave that? I mean, we've only got about 5 minutes now left of the session, but if you wanted to share those slides, that's totally fine.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to showcase
Could we have the slides,
just an example.
Please?
Yeah, if we can display, I've got a couple of slides, a couple of graphs. If we can display them, just to showcase an example of the difference of performing between different areas in the world. In this case, we are benchmarking two different indicators which are pretty key to better recognize the recovery options. One is the security perception index, and the other one we will see in the next slide is the access facility indicator for destinations. If we go to the first, we will see a evolution of the last 12 months of the security perception for different cities, capitals in Europe and Middle East, in this case Dubai, and we can see how clearly Dubai was performing better than the Western destinations during the last 12 months. And if we pay attention to the order of these, we see Dubai followed by London, Madrid, and Rome. That's the order, right? And if we go to the next slide, we will see the evolution of the air connectivity. That's the access facility to those destinations. And we'll see exactly a correspondence between the recovery of air connectivity. That's not something strange. There is a direct correlation in between the confidence of the potential travelers and the recovery of the air connectivity. We see here Dubai, first of all, Rome close to Madrid, London close to Madrid, and the last one is Rome till now, right? I think it's a good example to display how we can monitor the recovery trends for different destinations.
Okay, so building on that question of data, a question for you all. So we're very used to seeing pandemic data now and the way that drives decision-making right across the world. So my question is, would each of you agree that fact-based decision-making is guiding the market enough right now? And also, how ready do you believe the sector is to embrace data-led decision-making at the right level? So if I could start with Kashif on that one and then lead to Nigel and then Mario. Kashif.
Thank you. So yes, I personally think from a data perspective, there's enough data out there for authorities, governments, aviation ecosystem stakeholders to make informed decisions with respect to the challenge COVID is posing, but also what it would take for them to restart aviation or tourism activity by using the data that we have available with respect to positivity rates across the world, challenges plus guidance from the likes of ICAO, the World Health Organization, but then establishing plans to open up their borders safely, to look at growing traffic, but also opening up to tourism, which is often at times a great contributor to GDPs within the region. So in my perspective, yes, there is enough data out there for stakeholders to ensure a safe restart.
Thank you. Nigel?
Yes, what I would say on this is I think there's almost too much of a focus by governments on the data relating to the virus, to the pandemic. And we need to see a more of a balanced approach. So I think what we've seen is a sort of an approach about eliminating all risk of people catching the virus. And it needs to be much more of a risk management approach. And I think you saw Paul Griffiths speaking about this recently, the CEO of Dubai Airports. So I think we all have a role actually to help communicate to governments the value of travel and tourism, not just in terms of the economic impact, the job creation, etc. And don't forget that travel and tourism is a key sector in terms of employing women, youth, people from more rural backgrounds. So it is a great economic driver in that sense. But also I think the social well-being, the mental well-being that you get associated with travel. So I think we all have a role to help build a stronger case for that, to help balance what has happened where borders are now closed and people cannot travel. And I mentioned it in terms of some of the key data points at the start. The loss of 60 million jobs, and that would have been much more severe if it hadn't been for some of the protection programs that have been put in place. And if you look at travel and tourism as 10% of the total global GDP being reduced last year to just over 5%, 5.5%, it shows that travel and tourism has been bearing the brunt of the pandemic. And I think we now need to see much more of a balanced approach to get travel and tourism going again and contributing to the sort of economic and social well-being of the world's population.
Mario, do you want to add anything?
Sure, just briefly. I do believe data is the new oil. It's extremely important. It's extremely valuable. And I think moving forward, what we need is more real-time information, more information that is actually showcasing what's happening today, because the situation keeps evolving really and more frequency of update of data moving forward. But also the other element I'd like to just close on is the fact that we do as an industry need to expand our data sets to look at other measurements than what we've been measuring for a number of years, which is how many people visit the destination, how much are they spending. Those are critical information. We still need to measure them, but we need to look at other type of measurement to make sure that we can actually react much faster to situations like the ones we're facing today and the ones we'll be facing in the future.
Carlos, do you have anything you just want to add to that last question?
Yeah, I just want to add
Although you answered
that,
your own question already.
From my perspective, we are facing a crisis of uncertainty, right? And so that brings all to one point. It's having information, as Mario just said, up-to-date, real-time information. That's what the sector needs. You cannot look back and make decisions with historical data or with the knowledge you have by your experience on the sector, because nobody has faced a situation like this. So it's so obvious that having information, it's the only way to recovery.
Okay, unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, we are out of time, but I would very much like to thank all of our panelists for participating from around the world. I think it's been a fascinating discussion and a real need for industry collaboration. I hope that by the time we all get together next year, we'll be together in person, either here in Dubai or somewhere else in the world. Great thanks to the audience for listening, and hope you found it interesting. Thanks to Paula for co-moderating with me, and thanks to the technicians for making it all work from around the world. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your show, and thank you for your time. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.